Well, hello there, you seeker of light. Welcome to the shadow world. What I want to talk about today is the question of ordination, a monk's ordination. So I got an email from a friend of mine in the Soto tradition who is being asked about ordination in the Rinzai tradition, and that really opened up a can of memory worms that I have been sifting through this morning while fishing for video ideas. We're going to talk a little bit about becoming a monk in the Rinzai tradition, but more importantly, the Rinzai tradition as I experienced it, because that's a different thing than the Rinzai tradition as my teacher who ordained me experienced it in Japan. So we're going to unpack this can of ordination worms today on Zen Confidential. Okay, gang, so first of all, what I want to do is give kind of a speed version of the big picture that will eventually end with my own ordination and the ordination of people within my specific lineage. So, my teacher was like born in Japan, and when he was 14 years old, he, apocryphally or not, walked on foot across much of Japan to arrive at the monastery. He eventually gets ordained as a monk. Eventually he becomes a priest. Many years pass. He finally becomes, I forget what it was, maybe in his 40s, a Roshi, or a Zen master. So within the Rinzai Zen tradition, there are very few students who make it all the way through monkhood and priesthood to the role of a Zen master. Very, very few. I mean, I want to say there's maybe like less than 50. Maybe there's just a few dozen Rinzai Zen masters in Japan now. A Rinzai Zen master is important because only a Rinzai Zen master can do full koan work. Now, a student passes through the, 1,400 some odd koans with the teacher, and then the teacher says, "You are as good as me or better at this. You can be a Zen master. Get out of my sight." It happens very rarely in the Zen tradition, but only a Zen master can give Inca or temple or Dharma transmission, and then only a person who's gotten Dharma transmission to some degree can do koan practice. There's a very strict hierarchical system of practice and leadership at the Japanese monasteries I visited. So it's hard to describe. I mean, it seems very, very rigid on the surface. It seems like people are in these roles and they're all relating to each other according to these roles, and everyone is very clearly defined and to an untrained eye stuck in these roles. But what I learned is there's a lot of wiggle room in the sense that the human being is not defined by the role. The human being is occupying the role. And I think this is something that's really hard to understand from a Western perspective. Like, we would look at our teacher in his Roshi role and we would say, the enlightened guy who came from Kyoto, Japan, from Meiji era Japan, passed all his koans, became a Zen master, traversed the ocean to teach us Zen, enlightened being. My impression in Japan was, yeah, here's another Roshi. The guy is occupying the role of teacher right now, but there are others who can rise up into that role and occupy the role. The role is what's important, not the person in the role. So there are really strong cultural differences at the core of a Western or American understanding of and practice of Zen, and in my experience, the Japanese practice and understanding of Zen. So, my teacher becomes a Zen master in Japan, and I guess he was causing some trouble. There are various accounts out there about this. I met two of his sons from two different women. Oh boy, I got loading this with a lot of gossip here. Suffice to say, my teacher comes here to the States. He's got a little place in Los Angeles. The people who asked for my teacher to come put him up. And his thinking is, I'm just going to teach a bunch of these gaijin meditation. He had pretty humble aspirations. Just teach some people how to sit. I mean, he's in his 50s. He doesn't speak a word of English. It's a very humble beginning. But of course, more and more hippies come. This was in the 60s. And eventually, he starts building momentum. Now, what's going on here? Is he like a missionary? Not really. A Zen master is on his own. He's also very loosely affiliated with Japan. So the ties are not clear in the same way like a Catholic priest going to Japan many decades or centuries before would have clearly been linked to, say, the Vatican, or the way that Mormons now, I can see them on the streets here, I even saw them on the streets in Japan, are linked to the Mormon church in Utah. Now, my teacher had to figure out what he was going to do with us. So he decided he was going to replicate the system that he had in Japan, but it was going to ultimately take on a Western energy. He's got a bunch of individualistic Christian, Jewish, Catholic, atheist students who want to train somehow. So my teacher found a great way to train people. He would dangle the gift of ordination over their heads. Oh, you answer this koan, I make you monk. You become my monk. Roshi take you in his heart. You become my monk. You know, now you've got inspiration to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, pound through those morning sits, rush into Sanzen practice, and give him an answer to your koan. You know, it's really hard to stay inspired. You start questioning yourself, questioning your peers, questioning the teacher, questioning everything. And once you're within the realm of a Roshi's teachings, it's his or her responsibility to help you and bring you into the Dharma. You can quit if you want, but my experience with my teacher was he's going to do everything possible he can to bring you to awakening and whatever. So he would dangle things in front of you. One of them was ordination, and ordination was very serious. It was a very serious next step within my tradition, which is to say my lineage with my teacher. But it didn't really mean anything outside of our community. So it was very clear, way across the drink at Myoshin-ji in Japan, or Zuiganji in Japan, our uncle and aunt lineage temples or temple systems, it was very clear that we were not monks for them. Now, they offered, it is my understanding, to make us monks and to make our priests, to officially sign the documents and put our temple name up on the wall at Myoshin-ji where all the affiliate temples are. But allegedly, my teacher said no. He did not want to be associated with, he did not want to be in that lineage. Why? I don't know. I would just throw this out there and say my teacher was trying to do what he continually told us he was trying to do, which was make Zen, real Rinzai Zen, born in America. And to do that, you have to do it in American soil. And the lineage just doesn't translate so cleanly into Western terms and into American terms, I would say. Now, I'm painting this with my own highly individualistic personal brush, but that was my experience, right? So we would get ordained, but it would mean something to us, and it would mean something to our relationship with Roshi and to each other. But it really didn't mean anything in the big picture. Like if I had a rucksu, it didn't mean anything to Americans, right? But Americans would interpret it by their own terms. Oh, some Japanese teacher brought you into his specific lineage, which means something in Japan. Like you can go to Japan and live for free at the temples and you probably know Japanese. No, it wasn't like that, right? So after a long period of time, a much smaller number of us still went from being monks to becoming priests. Now, a priest had greater responsibilities, again, understood only within our community, than a monk. A priest could teach Zen at a certain level and was expected to go out and start his or her own temple. So you stayed at the monastery for 10 years, 8 to 10 years, something in there. You completed your training, but it was a subtle completion. It was usually Roshi starting to criticize you. You went from being the best monk ever to the worst priest ever overnight. So once you became a priest, it was like, get out of my hair, go start your own temple. And again, there were these loose, strict rules operating under the surface. Like things were expected of you as a priest from Roshi, but he wasn't going to get up in your hair about it, right? But if he got wind that you were teaching above what you were supposed to be teaching at, you got in trouble. Sometimes you got your robes taken away, as happened to a monk who was basically doing koan practice. My teacher found out about it, tore the guy's monks away. That led to some trouble within our community when that monk vengefully struck back, but that's another story. Now where was I going again? So after my teacher died, we had no successor. We had no one who could do koan practice with us. We were lost. We were a flock without a shepherd, if you will. So three of us went to Japan and supplicated ourselves before the grand poobahs of the Myoshin-ji Rinzai lineage in a way that I still don't understand, because it was all very subtle. Things were spoken, not spoken. Gestures were made, papers were signed, money passed hands, things were said, promises were made, conclusions were drawn from things that were unsaid. I mean, it was all very, very unclear to me. It was a highly political time. And it made me realize just how deep the politics can run in spiritual organizations, and just how deeply seditious and rebellious my own teacher was in continually ridding our organization of spiritual politics. And he did so by brutal methods sometimes, but the fact remains, I felt like I got an incredibly clean spiritual education. Brutal but clean. The only politics I had were personal politics that were also brutal with my monk peers. I never felt that from my teacher. But when he died and I got involved with this larger Myoshin-ji Rinzai Zen temple politics, I realized, wow, this is like Protestantism or Catholicism, but not quite. Like, again, it's a different cultural context, and they have a way of doing things. And what I came to realize is that there's a lot of pomp and circumstance around taking vows, around Tokoro Shiki, which is monk's ordination, Suiji Shiki, which is a priest's ordination, and Inka, which is a Roshi ordination. There's a lot of politics around it. You don't necessarily rise through the ranks because you're enlightened. And that's the point of this video. And it's taken me a while to get to it. And I've told a lot of rambling, shambolic stories just to bring us here. Because it's a point that's really hard to get across to people. Because when we see those robes and that rakusu, and we see someone who can hold space, right? Someone who can give you a little shakti pot, a little boost of energy and some connection, and they're in those robes and they're in a temple setting, we usually just assume that they're pretty dang enlightened, but that's definitely not the case. There is little to no correlation between where a person stands in the temple or monastic hierarchy and like where they're at on the spiritual path, okay? And I tell you this because it's good news for those of us who are regular people in our daily lives. I really believe that each practice is single-sized for that person, and each practice path is specifically for each individual. Ordination can be a step on that path. It certainly was for me. I would have probably found some reason to quit, and it would have been a lame personal reason. I came close a couple times for reasons that involved terrible interactions with peers at the monastery, right? But I stayed on that path because I felt like I had a job to do, and I had people counting on me, including my teacher. Now I don't feel that way, right? I feel like, oh, the robes helped me get through that, and I'm so glad they did, because like a little boy, I would have quit for little boy reasons. I would have quit and walked away, and I didn't because the robes fooled me. The Osho belt fooled me. It said, you're responsible for people, right? When you tie your monk's belt, the knot that you use is the same knot that my teacher's attendants used to use when they were making packages for gifts. And when you do your great bows before your parents at your ordination ceremony, you're saying goodbye and you're giving yourself to your teacher. And your teacher is helping you learn how to give yourself to the practice, and then ultimately to give yourself to a community of practitioners as a teacher. These are roles. These are ceremonies, rituals, and customs. And we take them as Bible in America because we have a really bad fixated view of religion. At least I did growing up as a Catholic. Like, I was told that wafer of bread that I got at the Mass was Christ's body. There was no sense of metaphorical play beneath the surface. There was no sense of a role, any priest having a role, or the wafer of bread having a role within a ritual. There was no sense that I had to give myself to that ritual and then Christ is manifested. No, Christ is in the bread, motherfucker, and that's that, right? So it can be hard. What was I talking about again? So maybe Rinzai Zen asks you to do something totally impossible. It asks you to take the robes 100% seriously without taking the robes 100% seriously. It asks you to take the rituals and the form of the practice 100% seriously, but if you take them 100% seriously, you're gonna miss the point, okay? So, all those unmasters have a sense of humor because this is a little bit crazy, but it's also true and honest and straightforward. And that is what I like about Zen. It doesn't dilly-dally and smick-smack around saying, if you do this ceremony or these 100,000 bows, eventually you will begin to attain a new level of understanding and practice. It says, if we can learn perhaps to give ourselves to the rituals, to the robes, to the roles, we can also give ourselves to the people in our lives and the small, regular, daily activities. And it says there's no fundamental difference between the two. It says there's no religion here. It says there are no robes. Fundamentally, there are no robes. And it's so hard to get this across through a robe-based practice and hierarchy and spiritual institution. Maybe that's why Zen is dying in Japan. People are impatient with this kind of difficult, thankless style of spiritual practice. Maybe it's why Zen is never, ever really, truly getting born in America, because we just don't get it. Again and again and again, people would struggle and strive to get that Tokudo Shiki Rakusu. And then when they got it, they would disappear. They would get some girl pregnant, or become pregnant, or get into some dispute with Roshi or a monk, and that would be it. It is per my spiritual and personal integrity that I must fling off these robes and leave this institution, you know? People didn't want to have to work for nothing. And that's what you do as a Zen monk and a Zen practitioner. You work for nothing. You work for nothing. You know, no, really, in the end. Yes, you get robes. Yes, they do mean something. But the robes are also empty. Yeah? The role is also empty. And this is one of the beautiful and heartbreaking realities of Zen. And I think it poses interesting challenges for those of us in this contemporary world where like status and role and identity is so important. We're all looking for a place in this world. We're all looking for somewhere where we fit in, you know? And boy, does being a monk seem like a cool calling. Everything slots into place. Every step we take, it's the step of a monk. Not a schmuck born in Wisconsin. A B student at best. A intermittently published writer, you know? No, I'm a monk, right? But I'm not a monk, really, anymore. I'm a lay Zen priest without a temple. I'm shouting into a camera, over-caffeinated, right? And this is what life is made of and practice is made of. Every single ordinary moment. Yeah? That's it. If you want to support this channel, you can go here, patreon.com/shozanjackhalhabner. I also have a link in the video description to PayPal. You can do a one-time donation there. Thank you, dear friends, those of you who helped throw some donations my way for the apartment flood in my girlfriend's apartment that I made a previous video about. Yeah, we're all in this together, all of us lay practitioners. We need a sign, like a Fight Club sign, right? Like instead of a, what was I gonna say? Black eye, we'll have like a torn rucksu. Dudes, that's who we are. We're the Torn Rucksu Club. TRC. Think about it. I like that. I'm gonna come up with some merch. Until next time, ciao, friends.